The latest on Pacioretty, Edmundson, and Dowd next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. I would love to talk Capitals hockey with you one-on-one, and we can do that on subtext. Just check the show description for more details. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. So in today's episode of Locked On Capitals, we talk about how Suzdalev was reassigned to play in Sweden. What is one of the things that we know is he was one of the top prospects for the Capitals, but one of the issues is there's a bit of a log jam at the forward position. So it is the belief that he would be better served getting more playing time over in Sweden. We'll talk about that in the show. A little bit later, we will talk about how Joel Edmundson and Nick Dowd are progressing and when can we expect to see them back on the roster. But just to get it going here, we will talk about Max Pacioretty. And what do we know about Max Pacioretty is he was a player that the Capitals picked up during this past summer. And they got him on the cheap, $2 million plus $2 million more in incentives. But the big downside to him is he spent the last two seasons with Achilles issues and missed a substantial amount of time. But what is one of the things that we know about Max Pacioretty is 6 times in his career, he has scored 30 goals. And at the time that the Capitals made that acquisition, there wasn't a lot of cap space. There's not a lot of cap space now. So ultimately, I think it was a good deal. But what is the latest on Max? Well, they were talking about that today. Max Pacioretty met the press. And what were his thoughts on it? Max Pacioretty declares that he's gotten his life back after spending a lot of time sitting by himself. Just as his family kind of went about their business around him, resting up, trying to return. He had some difficult decisions to make. Max has skated just 3 times, but being back on the ice after tearing his Achilles twice in a span of 5 months. So it was a bit difficult at first, he said, but he said, this is what I was born to do. And ultimately, I think it's probably for him a lot like someone that, hasn't ridden a bike for a while. If you're an adult, maybe sometimes you haven't popped on a bike since you were a child, perhaps, but it comes back to you pretty quick. I think that is the case for Max Pacioretty, and that's kind of what he talked about as much as what he said in the interview today. He says, I've never taken this much time off the ice, but says he feels pretty good. And when they tried to press him about a return date, he said that I have a couple dates circled in my head that I'm not going to tell anyone else when those dates are. But if we can make one of those work, then that's when it'll be. And I respect his privacy. He doesn't have to say anything to the press if he chooses not to. But it is going to be exciting to see what kind of player they have in Max Pacioretty. If they can even get just a little bit, a glimpse of what he used to be, 30 goal scorer. If he could score 20 goals, well, that would be quite the accomplishment in and of itself. So I'm ultimately excited to see where he fits. The interesting thing, of course, like I talk about on the show, and if you're an everydayer, you know that who comes out of the lineup. The difficult thing will be, I think, that when he goes on the ice is thinking back on those previous injuries, the past 2 seasons where he had those Achilles issues, and just not letting that kind of take over his thought process. Tom Wilson even spoke about it as much after his knee injury. His first couple times on the ice, you kind of baby it a little bit. It takes a while before you're ready to go and kind of put that injury in the rear view. I guess one of the benefits that Tom Wilson has over Max Pacioretty is age. But we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed for Max, and that's all we can do. He saw doctors all over the world, including Canada and Europe, trying to get a grip on what is wrong and why did this keep happening. He says it all stems from two fractures in a span of 2 years. And one of the things that is known is that if you have Achilles issues, that you are more prone to having them again in the future. So there is reason to be concerned. Make no mistake about it. But like I've talked about on the show during the summer, is there is no chance the Capitals would have ever been able to afford Max Pacioretty had he not had those injuries, diminishing his value is what I'm trying to say there. He's had some good and bad opinions after returning from his injury. Been going on in my career. I've been known to play through injuries, and obviously when you do, so it compensates into patterns, Pacioretty explained. So I dealt with 2 broken feet in 2 years, and I think that's when this really started to happen. And you hear about that quite often is that professional athletes, we've heard about that from Alex Ovechkin, among other athletes that will play through injuries. I remember Alex Ovechkin having a separated shoulder and still playing through it. So those, when you make it to this level, there is a high level of expectation for you to play. This isn't like you're playing beer league hockey, no, I'm not going to make it tonight. No, the Capitals are paying you a substantial amount of money. You better do your level best to play and help your team win games. But after my last injury, he says, I did speak to 5 or 6 who've you'd call the best experts in the world, and I got 6 opinions as to what I need to do moving forward. So I was frustrated with that, but it's beyond me now. So frustration at first, worrying about, is it going to happen again? Am I going to get injured again? Am I going to, in my first game with the Capitals, am I going to face another injury with my Achilles or something else? And he let those bad thoughts seep into his brain about, should I hang up the skates? Has too much been thrown at me that I need to know when to say when. But at the end of the day, he says that he was not going to let this injury dictate his future, that he is a hockey dad and he loves playing the game of hockey, and that if he can do it, if he can play hockey injury free, I think he's giving it one more go of it, is kind of what I summed up there. Then he's going to do it because he loves hockey and he's a hockey dad and he never gave up. An interesting story on him as well is that he moved in to Lars Eller's old house, and he said it was beneficial for him because in the garage there was a spot set up where you could practice shooting the puck. So kind of an odd story, a strange turn of events, I guess, that he moved into Lars Eller's old house and had a great opportunity to keep his hockey skills sharp. So that was a cool story to hear there, but that's what we're pulling for right now. As we know, and I spoke about in yesterday's podcast, that the Capitals are looking for a top 6 forward, a goal scoring forward. And I think that, that would be complementary to Max Pacioretty. If they could get 2 scoring forwards on this team, then I think that is going to put them in a good position, because Lord knows scoring goals is something that has eluded the Capitals thus far. You're getting all your production from Strome. You're getting it all from Wilson. Milano's been in there a little bit, but, the veterans on the team that are known for scoring goals have struggled doing it thus far. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about the latest with Joel Edmundson, a guy that came from the Habs in the offseason. At free agency, what is one of the things that we know is that Montreal retained 50% of his salary. He's 6'5", 230 pounds, a rugged defenseman. When will we see him? And Nick Dowd holding it down on the 4th line. When can we expect to see those two come back? I'll discuss next. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it back to peak performance from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. A new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Alex Ovechkin could score 50 goals. The Capitals could hoist the Stanley Cup, and you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. I got to be honest, before I did this show, I wasn't too familiar with fantasy hockey, but then I found out about Sleeper, and let me tell you, I love doing fantasy hockey now, and I think that you will too. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Capitals fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. I have a lot of great guests lined up for you in November and December, not to mention that I have game breakdowns after each and every game. So subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals today. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about the status of Joel Edmundson and Nick Dowd. Again, like I talked about in the first segment, we know that Joel Edmundson was the guy that came here from the Habs, big rugged defenseman. Tom Wilson said he was surprised that a guy that size, 6'5", around 230 pounds, can close space in a hurry and can be a real deterrent in front of the net if need be. So a real pleasant feature that he has when he makes his debut with the Capitals playing in the regular season. And also Nick Dowd, who we know has been just a steady force on the fourth line for quite some time for the Capitals. So what is the latest that we know? GM Brian McClellan told reporters Tarek El-Bashir that defenseman Joel Edmundson and forward Nick Dowd are nearing a return from injury, and the hope is that both can return to team practice later this week. That is exciting as a Capitals fan to have Nick Dowd back. And I know that there's been players that have played on the fourth line with a little bit of mixed reviews. We saw Phillips down there, Protas and different players kind of cycle through. And it would be good to have a fourth line, what it was, let's say last year when it was Hathaway, or even the season before when it was Hagelin, Hathaway, and Dowd. Just a really great fourth line. So I'm excited to see Nick Dowd come back and also see what Joel Edmundson has in the tank. Edmundson has yet to make his debut for the Caps, who acquired him for 3rd and 7th round picks this summer, but he would likely take Alexander Alexiev's spot on the left side of the Washington's defense. So it was a great opportunity for some of these players. Alex Alexiev, who's a guy I had circled making the big team this summer, but then things changed and life changes. It throws you a lot of curveballs sometimes as the Capitals acquired Joel Edmundson and Lucas Johansson And Hardy Ham and Octel had a better training camp than I think a lot of people anticipated. So, I mean, I wouldn't set that in stone, but that is just kind of tentative, I guess, that Alex Alexiev would most be reassigned back to Hershey. Dowd, his return would likely allow the team to return to its current fourth line, Hendricks Lapierre, back to Hershey, a move that might better suit his development. And what is behind that statement, suit his development? It's great that he's playing on the big team, but if he is not going to get regular playing time with Nick Dowd back in the lineup, he would be best served playing in Hershey, where he should be able to get more playing time. That was one of the things that I'm going to talk about in the following segment. Is there's a bit of a logjam down in Hershey with forwards. There is an abundance of great forwards playing in Hershey right now, and Lapierre is going to be in the mix there. So it's going to be interesting, like I say, to see Joel Edmundson. We know that we've already seen injuries, mostly brief injuries with the Capitals on the blue line already, and we're only 10 games in. So it's going to be good to see Joel Edmundson on the blue line, a big guy out there, to see what he has. But, there are some things to worry about with Joel Edmundson as well. I'm not sure, if this is going to be an issue or not, but I know that last year and previous years, he had issues with his lower back. So, hopefully that's something that's not going to come back and haunt him at some point. But again, when they made these acquisitions during a free agency, they did it because it was a player they could afford. They were able to get Joel Edmundson because he was cheap, and Montreal retained 50% of his salary. But, if you take a look at the back of his hockey card, if you listen to the players that practiced with him in Hershey, or excuse me, this practice before the season started here, it was all glowing reviews. Tom Wilson, like I said, talked about how he was able to close space in a hurry, and for a big guy, he can move around really well. So I'm excited to see what they end up having in Joel Edmundson, and see if he is as advertised. If he is even just a little bit, I think that is going to really hold down the blue line, because what is one of the things that we know is that John Carlson is a guy that eats up a lot of minutes. You have Rasmus Sandin and Martin Feravari also, who eat up a decent amount of minutes, but it's good to have someone else kind of take on some of that load. So you're not the guy that's, pulling the rope for the entire team here. So, but everything that has been said, and what I saw during camp with him, I think Joel Edmundson is going to be an excellent addition to this team on the blue line. And of course, Nick Dowd, who we know is just a really great dynamic player and is just a key in this Capitals team and their success. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about how Alexander Suzdalev got reassigned and will be playing over in Sweden. What was behind that? I'll talk about that coming up. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And let me tell you something, guys. If you're watching a game and maybe you're not that into it, say you're watching a Commanders or a Ravens game, if you have a little bit of money on the game, it makes watching the game that much more exciting. So visit fanduel.com/locked on and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So one of the big prospects for the Capitals is Alexander Suzdalev, who, there was high hopes for him, that he was going to go from the juniors. He was going to just make a skip over to Hershey and maybe just a quick hop over to the Capitals. As it turns out, it has not gone according to script, but I think that this could actually even be a positive thing for Suzdalev, as there, like I talked about in the second segment there is a bit of a logjam with the forwards. They reassigned Alexander Suzdalev from the Hershey Bears to play over into one of the top tier teams in Sweden. The plan was for him to go to Hershey and eventually the Capitals, but things got difficult when the Capitals won the Calder Cup. Everyone's resume got a lot better, and this team wanted to keep the winning going. So it was difficult. So what is one of the things that we know is there are some AHL veterans that kind of have held it down there. Mike Vecchione, Joe Snively, and Mike Scarboza. So, those players are going to play 9 times out of 10. And then you take a look at some of the younger players on the team as well, with Ivan Miroshnichenko, Pierre Dubé, and Hendrix Lapierre. And then there's also a couple players that are vying for spots as well. Other young players that are in the mix with Ryan Hofer and Bogdan Treniev. So I think that, he kind of took the right approach and said, I don't know how much playing time I'm going to get out here, that I would probably be, better off playing somewhere where I'm going to get some more playing time. And what some people have said is, why doesn't he just go back to juniors? He's past playing in juniors and will get decent playing time in Sweden in one of their top leagues. So again, that is what we're looking at there for him. It's not that he's done. He got reassigned. And at some point, maybe he will be able to make his way back to the team. I don't know if that's going to happen, when there are a lot of prospects. There is always the possibility that someone gets traded. There's someone, that just doesn't compete the way you thought they were going to compete, and ultimately is not in the Capitals' long-term plans. What is one of the things that we know is that Brian McClellan said that he wants to address the top 6 and find a scoring forward. But a lot of the teams that are interested, primarily, the Capitals want to offload Anthony Mantha's contract, but it's not that easy. That's advantageous for the Capitals, but the other team wants a bit of a sweetener, is a common term that's being thrown around. And oftentimes that's a prospect, something of that nature. And one of the things that I know from last season during the trade deadline is that they were talking about Chychrun, that the Capitals were all in on Chychrun coming here. But what is one of the things that they requested was Connor McMichael, Hendrix Lapierre, or both. So, I think that a lot of people around, GMs, that is, around the NHL, they see who the big names are for the Capitals. And, at this point, being that there is a bit of a log jam at the forward position, maybe, 1 or 2 of those forwards is expendable. I guess depending on which forward that is. We know that Connor McMichael is playing on the big team right now. Same goes for Hendrix Lapierre. But like I talked about earlier, when Nick Dowd comes back, Hendrix Lapierre figures to go back down to Hershey. Connor McMichael is holding it down at the third line center position in Nick Backstrom's absence. I don't see anything changing there unless he totally falls off. But that's the position that the Capitals are in. And could Suzdalev at some point be an expendable piece to help upgrade this team? Sure, potentially. But we don't know that right now. And, if you take a look at Vecchione, if you take a look at Scarboza, those are veteran guys that I think that's where they're going to be. They're really great AHL players. And they've played this long. I don't know if there's any hope or long-term plans for them playing up in the NHL on the Capitals. I think that, just if you're asking me right now, I think that that's kind of their destiny, is to be a really great AHL player. And I'm not here to knock that. It's still professional hockey, and you're still making a fairly decent amount of money doing something that you love. It's just not everyone gets the great opportunity to play in the NHL. You have to be really, really, really good to get a sweater night in and night out, or, it'll be over for you. And take a look at Anthony Mantha. Just a couple of years ago, the Capitals moved heaven and earth to bring him here. And now we're trying to do anything to get rid of him or, trade him. And this isn't a knock on him. It's very difficult to be that good of a player to get a jersey night in and night out in the National Hockey League. So, you take a look at Suzdalev, you take a look at some of the other prospects and players down in Hershey I was speaking of. Not all of them are going to be destined for the Capitals. Not all of them are going to be destined for the NHL. But what is some of the things that we know? Sometimes a change of zip code, a change of scenery is just what the doctor ordered. Take a look at what Varlamov did. You slamming the door on the Capitals, a former Capitals goalie, if you don't know. Phoenix Copley, who last year totally killed it for the Kings. a Capitals goalie that was in the AHL and the ECHL for the longest period of time. It just never worked for the Capitals, went out to the Kings, and at least last year played really, really well. And, if that's just off the top of my head, there are plenty of other players that have gone on. You take a look at Siegenthaler, and there's, a bunch of players where it was just a change of scenery and they're playing much better. So, just because these players, these prospects for the Capitals necessarily aren't going to have their forever home in the district, that does not mean that they wouldn't be a good option as a trade chip. And, am I saying that's going to be Suzdalev? Not necessarily, but potentially it could be, because that's what you do. You get enough assets. And if those assets, don't have a home, then you flip them to get something that's going to help your team. Again, the top six forward we've heard about for the longest period of time. There's these certain things that we hear all the time. This team needs to get younger and faster. That's one thing you could go ahead and print on a t-shirt. And the other thing that we hear all the time as well is we need to address the top six. That could be on the front and the back of a t-shirt and put a Capitals logo on it. It would sell like crazy. But you know what I'm talking about? Just checking these things off one after one, get that top six forward. It's going to be difficult because people are going to say, oh, you got this guy. I wouldn't exactly call him a top six because everyone's an expert at the end of the day. But I do think they need a great goal scoring top six forward to help jumpstart this team. You take that plus the additions on the roster of Max Pacioretty, and at least on paper, if you were to show it at me, I would say, yeah, that looks pretty good. I think that it's at least worth a shot. I'm not going to, etch it in stone that it's going to be successful, but it at least deserves a look. And I think that's what, at the end of the day, all we can be hopeful for. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering your Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. Are you a fan of other DC sports? Well, Locked On has got you covered. We have Locked On Nationals, Commanders, Wizards. So no matter what major DC sport it is, Locked On has got you covered. And are you also a fan of the NHL at large? Well, we have Locked On NHL available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.